FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 9/7/19 and a aftermath of the storm. Not much going on here, but any help, I guess, that we can afford those poor victims of the hurricane in the Bahamas, we should be doing it. And there's lots of worthy charities. I don't usually give to the big charities. You know who they are. Too much corruption, too much fraud. There are places in the Bahamas that really give to them direct. That's my advice. And of course, the U.S. military will be there. They're always there when there's a humanitarian disaster. Other countries might not show up, but the U.S. does. I know Great Britain has sent a couple of ships. They need our help. They really do. If you ever been to Grand Bahama Island, it's beautiful. The beaches are phenomenal, and now there's nothing left. Even the airport was flattened. Hard to believe such disasters take place, but they do. It's a regular course of human events and human affairs. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. Many empires have ended because of natural disasters. Hopefully the Bahamas will be able to build it back up. They'd already been hit in 2016 by Hurricane Matthew, which was a Cat 4. Anyways, not to belabor the point, but any help is really going to be welcome. Well, we need some help here too, as far as the U.S.'s relationship with China. What's going to be with it? Well, our good friend Frank Vernuccio is with us now. Hey, as always, what are your thoughts on China? What do you think needs to be done? Is the U.S. Trump handling this properly, following the right course of action? We'd love to know your opinion. So email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. So Frank, we got a trade war, and I don't really call it a trade war, an economic war. It's been taking place between China and the U.S. for 40 years. The U.S. has just been oblivious to it until recently. And then we get Trump, and all of a sudden it's a giant wake-up call.
Terry, it's good to be with you again. Now, that's a good description. One of the realities that we have to face at this point in time, however, is that China, as well, by the way, as Russia, Iran, and North Korea, will be doing everything possible to embarrass the Trump administration going into the 2020 elections. China at this point is holding back on any kind of concessions in the trade talks for the simple reason that they have a deep hope that someone will replace Donald Trump and will go back to, just as you described, an administration that does absolutely nothing about China's unfair trade policies and the dumping that they have been doing. We talk about the trade policies. Dumping has to be considered part of that. The Commerce Department just released a report on China's dumping, and it's a serious issue. But China's entire perspective at this point is that anybody, just about anybody, would be easier to deal with than Donald Trump, and they have good reason for believing that. No one has ever really broached the issue with China in any significant way until Donald Trump came to office. So they will be going out of their way to do whatever inflicts pain on the American consumer in order to weaken Trump's chances of re-election in 2020.
Yeah, well, this is probably a very risky move, because what happens when Trump is reelected, which in all likelihood he's going to be?
As a matter of fact, the president himself brought that up. He said to China at one point, I believe he tweeted it, that he said, when I get reelected, I will have even less reason to negotiate with you to give any concessions. So he's laid down his gauntlet. China really has to decide where it wants to go on this one, whether it wants to gamble on Trump not being reelected, holding tough now, and then dealing with a greatly strengthened President Trump in 2020.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much more strengthened he'll be, other than he'll have been able to get rid of all the disloyal employees, or a big chunk of them, and then his agenda will really take place. You know, as an aside, the wall's going up 500 miles by 2020. We would have liked to have seen more. I don't think they need to build 2,000 miles of wall, but they probably need a good 700 to 1,000, and that's going up. Also, let's look at what's happening in Hong Kong. This is a real potentially incendiary situation for China because the Western Europeans have been very blasé about this whole thing, even though we probably know that their I don't want to call it loyalty, but their sympathies rest with the U.S. because they're as much of a victim of these Chinese trade practices as the United States. But once China moves into Hong Kong and puts down the rebellion, even Western Europe will not be able to tolerate that.
Well, look, the United States is having a significant amount of problems dealing with the Europeans on a variety of issues. Iran perhaps being even more prominent than China because of its immediacy. Europe has certainly been a weak link in all of Europe has been a weak link in all of this. They seem to have lost their ability to hang tough on any really significant issue.
Yeah, it's a little bit sad to think once great people, the Brits, the French, the Germans have just kowtowed to China and just rolled over, basically.
Actually, another great example of that is what Angela Merkel is doing with Russia. Her energy policies are putting Europe in the position of being totally subservient to Russian energy, which really, really handicaps in what Europe's independence is in international affairs. It's a major problem. And it seems as though Angela Merkel doesn't even see it, or perhaps does and simply doesn't care.
Yeah, well, this is what we're up against. But the idea of China taking really aggressive action against these people in Hong Kong, that could be the tipping point, huh?
Well, we have to see. Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, has now rescinded the order that said that that Hong Kongers could actually be tried in mainland China. Now, from the Chinese perspective, this has a lot of dangers. They might crack down simply to make a point. The fact is, we see China as a great sovereign power, a major, huge nation. But if you look at it more closely, and I was just talking to someone who is a former State Department official specializing in China. She was in China during some of the most harrowing times of the past 20, 25 years. And if you look at it from their perspective, they've got Tibet, which they are occupying illegally and committing genocide in. They have the Uyghurs in the western part of the country they are also committing genocide against, and by the way, on a massive scale. The coast of China seems secure. The people are relatively satisfied. But you go even in the ethnic Han areas of China that are away from the major cities, and you don't see a lot of economic progress in the daily lives of the people there. So China is looking at a population that is increasingly restive. Their economic growth has slowed. It's 6%, which for China, believe it or not, is actually fairly slow. And a lot of their economy, frankly, is very vulnerable. One of the things that it's unfortunate why the United States population as a whole hasn't gotten more solidly behind Donald Trump, this is a trade dispute that I think can be easily won. China needs the United States dramatically more than the United States needs China. The U.S. can do very well without trading with China. The reverse is simply not true.
Yeah, this is very true. It's a little bit early in the game here. We have to see how it's going to play out. We're not really sure how this thing is going to come, but certainly it looks like Trump is not backing off, and China is suffering as a result. And I just want to make one comment. The so-called 6% economic growth probably is far less. It's probably almost to the point of being a contraction, economic contraction, China.
I think that's probably a valid point. They're not going to be the same freedom of the press to look at the actual economic situation there. And also, again, the economic spread of the wealth in China is not quite as wide as you would think it is. Again, you go outside of the major cities, and it's simply not spreading to the general population, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why President Xi seems really reluctant to show any sign of weakness whatsoever. Now, of course, he is considered the president for life of China, But you have to wonder how long that's really going to last until the population really gets restive, whether because of a lack of economic progress throughout the country or the fact that his basic policies don't really seem to be working for the majority of the population.
Yep, that's very true. Well, on the other hand, more people are joining the Chinese middle class every year. And you have to wonder, it has been an economic miracle in a lot of ways, Frank.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Trilogy Metals is a world-class developer in Alaska's Ambler mining district. The company already possesses 8 billion pounds of copper, 3 billion pounds of zinc, over 1 million gold-equivalent ounces, and now over 77 million pounds of cobalt. Trilogy's Arctic project boasts an after-tax net present value of $1.4 billion with a 33% IRR. Trilogy is led by an experienced management team with proven success in discovering and developing projects in Alaska. The company is well capitalized, has no debt, and possesses strong institutional support. Trilogy trades on the New York and Toronto exchanges under the ticker symbol TMQ. To learn more, go to trilogymetals.com. That's trilogymetals.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, it certainly has, but you have to wonder whether the normally entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese, which is keeping China's economic progress going, whether they are beginning to see the Communist Party more as a hindrance than as a factor in igniting that economic revival.
Yeah, that's very true. And we absolutely know that that there are major issues there, especially with the state-owned companies. They've ended their so-called liberalization, their economic liberalization. So we might see a totally different economic picture in China, especially if the U.S. disengages from them and just doesn't take any more of their goods or any more than
as an aside, one of the fears that some folks have said about trade disputes with China is what will they do with their bonds and all that sort of thing. The folks I have spoken to in major firms like Salomon Brothers and others, vets of that firm actually, believe that countries like Saudi Arabia, Japan, and others are more than willing and more than capable of taking up any slack that could result from China not buying or trying to dump U.S. bonds.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see about that. The Federal Reserve can always buy them up if need be, and we know they've done it in the past, and they'll probably continue to do it. So that will be an interesting thing to see how it works out.
It will. And, you have to wonder, too, whether any slowdown in trade relations with China would actually work to the benefit, perhaps, of countries in the Western Hemisphere like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, who, dealing with them, bringing the low-cost labor jobs to those countries, it actually has some spillover effect in preventing or discouraging, rather, some illegal immigration to the United States.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. So what about progress being made on the illegal immigration front? What's your take there?
Well, of course, Congress goes back to work this coming Monday, and the border wall is something that will be on the agenda. Now, so far, there has not been a lot of room for compromise from the Democrats on that issue, but the president is seeking additional funds. It looks as though he's going to win. Certainly, he's been winning in the courts on some of the use of defense funding for the wall. And when you think of it, Terry, isn't defending the border one of the most traditional uses of the military? And I think the courts are looking at that as well. And that's why the president has been fairly successful in doing this.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly, one of the key functions of the federal government is to protect us from enemies inside, within, and without. And certainly a lot of these people are potential enemies who are crashing our border. MS-13, you see that 68% of the federal apprehensions last year were people not born in the United States.
That's exactly right, which is a pretty significant change from the 1998 when it was, I believe, it was about 60% of the federal arrests were of American citizens. Now it's exactly the opposite. So you're going to see the public really begin to concentrate on that a bit more. Now, certainly the media is not going to do their job, but there are enough outlets out there, including great shows like yours, which are spreading that word. So I do think the public is going to be aware of that. And by the way, it kind of brings up an interesting side issue, which is a major factor going into 2020 is a civil war within the Democrat Party. Terry, if you look at the people who have traditionally voted Democrat, blue-collar workers, minorities, they have been detrimentally affected by illegal immigration. You have to wonder how long they're going to continue to support a party that doesn't support their interests.
That's a great question. Yes, they are definitely in shambles here between the Pelosiites and the AOC contingent, right? I mean, really, you wonder how much longer this can go on here.
That's exactly the point. And, I think the level of support that you're seeing in the primaries is kind of fascinating because no candidate has really taken off. What that seems to tell is that, while they might say we prefer candidate A over candidate B in the primaries, what you don't see is a significant level of enthusiasm for any candidate. Let's take Biden, for example. Joe Biden is certainly the front runner.
You take him. I don't want him.
Well said. Well said. But take Joe Biden, and at this point, a strong front runner would actually be gaining support. Biden has the best support of any of the candidates, but he's not really going anyplace. That demonstrates to me a significant lack of enthusiasm for his candidacy.
Yeah, well, how could you be enthusiastic about a guy who basically doesn't even know where he is at any given time? When you get into a car accident or get some kind of injury, the first thing the EMT asks is, do you know where you are? And Biden would probably get admitted to the hospital as a result because he usually doesn't know where he is.
It's interesting. The Democrats have a lot of candidates, but they're not really strong candidates. I mean, coming in number 2 to Biden is Elizabeth Warren, and we all know the history of Massachusetts candidates, with the exception of John Kennedy. I mean, after Kennedy, Massachusetts candidates for president have simply not done very well, particularly when they're that hard to the left.
Joe Biden is I've used this analogy for the U.S. dollar too, but he's literally the Taj Mahal of Baltimore.
Yeah, well said. I just don't see a lot of voter familiarity or voter seeing him as one of us, one of the guys, It's not really there.
How can you get excited about him? I mean, let's get real here. The guy, I won't even get into all the things, all the bad things about him that we've seen. The guy is a train wreck. He's a total train wreck.
The other problem the Democrats are having is that there is no one who is not ideologically to the left, or at least expressing hard left views. Mm-hmm. The Democratic Party was never this extreme to the left. And I think they are alienating a good part of their base. And until that changes, and you wonder whether there's a surprise candidate out there, but it's hard to see who it would actually be. I just don't see a lot of enthusiasm other than in the media and academia for the Democrat candidate. This is going to be similar to what happened in 2016. I suspect, Terry, that going into election night, the first Tuesday in November of 2020, we're going to hear all the prediction that Trump is going to be trounced. And then we're going to see on election day itself that the president did a lot better than most people expected, or that most pundits, I should say, expected.
Well, you know what, pundits, you know what, these so-called experts are always wrong, right?
Yeah. In fact, I had a poster who worked for me a number of years ago, and he said with the advent of cell phones, polling really took a beating. It's just not going to be accurate. A lot of people who are asked about their opinions for polls when they're outside of their home, they're not on their home telephone, say what they think the pollster wants to hear or what the people around them they think want to hear. And what we consistently see is that liberal candidates, left-wing candidates, poll a lot better than they actually gain on election day itself.
Yeah, well, I started a movement that I hope is in full swing. I mean, it was underway before me, obviously, but that is that October before the election is National Lie to Your Pollster Month. And I think every person, and
I like that.
And Frank, every person has an obligation that if they are polled regarding any political campaigns, they should lie to the pollster. If you don't want to lie, just hang up on them. Do not answer them, but do not, under any circumstances, tell them the truth, because these polls are agenda driven. So let them be in their echo chamber, get only people who believe in their nonsense, and then, hey, fine. Go publish your results. We don't really care.
Yeah, certainly the election of 2016 proved that substantially.
Oh, yeah. And because those people were not telling the pollsters the truth, even the exit polls were skewed, right?
What's happened in our society is that when the media has become so far to one side, has become so partisan, that people have a perception that the thing that they're supposed to say is to basically agree with the media's perspective. What they believe privately tends to be something totally different.
So true. So true. So you're optimistic about Trump's chances for 2020?
I am. I just don't see any of the Democratic candidates in the final analysis pulling that strongly on election day itself. However, there continue to be some real problems. The chief among them, most people support Trump for one or two issues. One, of course, is the immigration issue. The other one is that they believe that Trump is much better for the economy. And Kerry, I know with your expertise in economic affairs, you've been watching all these stories on the part of the media desperately trying to induce a recession. Despite the relatively good numbers, you hear all these talks about a recession. When you confront some of the pundits and you say, well, give me your numbers. Why do you say there's a recession? And they say, well, it's coming. It's coming. It doesn't matter that we have great employment now, that business is optimistic now, that consumer confidence is good now. A recession is coming. I think the strategy there is to discourage people from investing, is to discourage people from hiring in the hopes that it will result in a recession that will be used against the president in the election. That's a pretty dirty pool, I think, but nevertheless, it is what's going on.
Yeah, well, Bill Maher, he wants a recession so Trump loses, right? Isn't that kind of sick?
Isn't that one of the most despicable things we've heard? Intentionally pushing a recession just for a political end, that's amazing.
He's a pretty despicable guy.
The analogy is always, it's kind of like being a passenger on an airliner saying, I hate the pilot and I hope he crashes this plane.
Yeah, I hate the airline and I hate Boeing, so let the plane crash, right?
There you go.
So it's a horrible state of affairs. It's really unacceptable. And yet this becomes the new normal. That's the problem with these guys. Well, hey, we've taken enough of your time, Frank. Appreciate you coming on. Just tell us, where do we find you? Best place to check out your work?
Well, thanks for asking, Kerry. It's usagovpolicy.com.
All right, usagovpolicy.com. See the show notes for the direct link, and you can just get right into the site. Frank, always a pleasure. Questions, comments? What do you think about China? What do you think about the 2020 election? Email us kl@kerrylutz.com. Twitter feed @KerryLutz. Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. And, of course, the website, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for your newsletter if you're listening on a podcast platform or you are watching it /listening on YouTube. Please subscribe, like, and share. It really helps us a lot when you do that. Frank, we'll talk to you again real soon.
Look forward to our next conversation, Kerry. Thanks.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.